Hello, hello, hello. This is Javier Rivera doing my commentary on OG Rose, their essay on beauty. It's a wonderful essay, by the way. I will link it in my descriptions for all of those who want to read. They also have a wonderful YouTube channel as well. I will try to link that. I'm hoping I'm not as technically, you could say, primitive. Hopefully I'm not too technically primitive as to be incapable, but nonetheless, I will attempt. At least I can probably succeed in tagging the essay to all of you. But nonetheless, let's proceed on talking about this wonderful essay on beauty. Now, what already strikes me about this essay is that the attempt to define beauty ends up in this mysterious undefinableness, right? But what I like about what OG Rose does here is that they, instead of trying to necessarily define it, they take you through the, you could say, how beauty unfolds to the individual, to the world. Some would call this, phenomenology, right? How the experience unfolds in itself, right? So beauty has this unique, I don't even want to say quality, but it does have this character, right? And I don't want to necessarily just give a summary here, but just to kind of show some very good points that were brought up. Some good points were the difference between beautiful and pretty. Now, OG Rose points that this would, could just be a matter of a difference between intensity of aesthetic pleasure, but he's still alluding to more about what beauty entails. He really capitalizes on what beauty is trying to do, right? When we say something is beautiful, right, you could say a painting is beautiful, but the more I try to deconstruct with you about what exactly about the painting is beautiful, it's almost like you can't point to it, right? You can't. I'll be like, well, is it the colors? Is it the scenery? Is it? And someone will say, well, yeah, it's the scenery. But I'm like, what about the scenery? Is it the boat in this position? Is it the colors that he used in this way? Is it because there's clouds, dripping in this way? And the more I dissect it and I ask the person where the beauty is found, it seems almost very impossible to point to, right? Because ultimately it's just a mass of colors and forms on a paper canvas, or you could say the canvas itself is just molecules, right? So what does it mean to even find beauty in anything? But OG Rose continues to break down how beauty unfolds. And just to kind of summarize briefly, it goes into beauty has this capacity to freeze you, right? It makes you stop. Beauty points beyond itself. Beauty is conditional. But it would be a mistake to also think that beauty is just conditional, because I get a sense that this conditionality that is being suggested in the essay is more than what we habitually have the notion of condition, but it's the very fact that this conditional is placed upon the observer, right? the observer has to meet the condition in order to then meet with beauty, right? To see beauty, to find beauty in the thing itself. So it's not merely relative or subjective, but rather it transcends subjectivity. And if we actually take this idea of beauty being conditional seriously, we could argue it's just as objective as anything else. I mean, just think about it, right? Scientists consider themselves the most objective observers, correct? Yet, in order to understand the object, they have to meet the conditions in order to understand it, right? So via telescope, via microscope, all these advances in technology, you could say, are the conditions required to understand an object further. I see beauty having no distinct difference in this case, right? That beauty requires us to meet certain conditions in order to understand it. And you could say every condition is a certain milestone that we kind of come across into a certain unveiling of beauty. Another good point by O.G. Rose is that, and this is the quote in section 4, is that there would be no beauty without observers, and yet things are needed for observers to see and for sight to matter. See, we're already getting to this idea that maybe beauty isn't exactly as subjective as people might believe, but rather we should pay attention to the way the experience unfolds, into which that leads us to determine something as beauty. Another quote that I like here is that beautiful is that which is visible in a world of most invisible things. And not only that, right, beauty points beyond itself. So there is this obsession in our philosophical investigations throughout history of philosophy that we're always trying to find the thing in itself. But here's what got me thinking. If beauty points beyond itself, and beauty is reflective, right? So this is another characteristic that O.G. Rose adds, right? Beauty is reflective. It got me thinking, what if we were to generalize this in a very great capacity? And that all the times that we have tried to discover the things in themselves were purely just reflective, right? So that means in order to discover a thing in itself, we have to meet the conditions. That means the thing in itself requires us to meet a condition to see the thing in itself. And I hope I kind of explained that thing, because what I'm using is a very generalized format of what O.G. Rose has just made for beauty. Beauty also creates hope and inspiration. They also allude to the fact that beauty is a calling, right? And that sometimes it can create this sort of existential anxiety. But I think the best way to frame that, and O.G. Rose does kind of allude to this, right? That this anxiety is something that, well, why would a person feel anxiety in the first place, right? Well, if we take their example or their characteristic of beauty being reflective, That means beauty is demanding you to meet a condition. And when you're in a state of anxiety, it's because you haven't met that condition. And the best way I can probably frame this is just imagine you're about to go on a date, right? So you know she's a very beautiful woman, and you're trying to get yourself ready. You know and because you know she's beautiful, you are in this high state of anxiety, right? You're trying to groom yourself well. You're trying to meet all the conditions that you can to appeal to her as well. Isn't that ironic, right? That you find her beautiful, yet because of her beauty, and her beauty is so reflective that you, in fact, are given anxiety, and because of this anxiety, you try to meet the conditions to then meet beauty, right? So beauty can be the symbolic woman that you're trying to go on a date with. So to me, I would say beauty has the capacity to actually push someone out of an existential crisis. Now, of course, this could be debated about how one interprets this, but ultimately, beauty is already an end and a starting point. One could say it's almost simultaneous, right? The beginning and the end. But this idea that beauty is mysterious, and I really like the way O.G. Rose talks about mysterious and mystery, because I 100% agree with them on this, is that just because mystery does not mean that something is inaccessible, but that it provokes for you to further pursue it. It's because it's mysterious that we continue to pursue it. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of mystery, you could say. And along the way, as you're trying to meet the conditions of beauty, it transforms you. And so I see now, right, we can see as we're sort of deconstructing this and summarizing this essay, that we see that beauty truly is reflective if it demands us to meet the conditions, right? It's almost like if you were to see someone's clean mirror and then you look at your dirty mirror. Now, you may have never thought about cleaning your mirror before, but then you realize how beautiful a clean and pure mirror looks like. It puts you in a state of, you could say, anxiety of not wanting to be judged for your dirty mirror, that you start cleaning your mirror so that you can also have a clean and pure mirror like somebody else. So this is how beauty is reflective, and how beauty forces someone, or already begins to change someone, even in the state of anxiety. I would even dare say that this anxiety is really just the beginning of change. Right? It's the beginning of change. It's the beginning of a dissemblance, right? It's a beginning of a taking apart and the process of a reformation. Now, another striking quote that O.G. Rose talked that I like is that when it said that humans are capable of seeing a thing as it is not. And so this goes back to my whole, philosophical, I guess, critique of the philosophy of history, where we're obsessed with trying to see the thing as it is. But here, O.G. Rose points, look, humans are capable of only seeing a thing as it is not. So then it makes me wonder if all these times that we spent discussing, trying to see the thing in itself, Well, maybe we're not supposed to see the thing in itself because the thing in itself doesn't exist. It's because it's what it's not. But they all rather point to something beyond themselves. Maybe it's just one thing. Transcending all the things that are not, right? It's just one thing, one entity, some would say. I wrote here in my little notes for this essay, for the commentary on this essay, I wrote, anxiety is the priming for conditioning. And so, this should give a lot of reflection, hopefully, on this essay that O.G. Rose wrote about on beauty and how it portrays itself, how it comes into being. I hope that it was of benefit to do this commentary, just sort of, elaborate further. I think even paying attention to the way beauty moves, right? If we were just to sort of generalize beauty, just how does beauty move itself? It seems to have no boundaries, really. No boundaries. So we can even say that beauty has a sort of, and O.G. Rose talks about it, this infinite deepening. And it has this sort of creative quality that provokes us to create. It calls us, but where this calling is from is rather mysterious. You could say beauty talks, but maybe beauty itself is a symbolic harp. All we hear is the tunes, and that is what calls us to move. But who is playing the harp is maybe who or what is playing the harp is probably the better question. But because beauty is visible to us, it should cause a deep sense of reflection in the way beauty itself manifests in a variety of individuals and how it's so particularly universal in its particularities. You could say it's almost as unique as someone's DNA or their fingerprint. What we find beautiful is not necessarily the same, as O.G. Rose points out, but there can be a great many of beautiful things that most people can agree on. I think perhaps the next time to discuss beauty would be to, what I would like to address further on, and hopefully, O.G. Rose and I will kind of conclude on this, or will not conclude, but have the meeting of the minds on this, is, how beauty moves. What does time in beauty mean? What does that entail? Because I get the feeling, and I can tell you already ahead of time, that beauty would transcend linear time itself. And you get a very good idea of how that transcends, especially if you've ever encountered something absolutely captivating, beautiful, right? So what is beauty in time? How does beauty move? These are all things to ponder upon. So anyways, this is my commentary on Beauty, essay by O.G. Rose. It was wonderful, and I